Today, I'm spilling the tea. I'm spilling the tea about how I moved out of my parents in my 20s, was on my own for a few years, and then had to spin the block and move back in with my parents one baby later in my 30s. So if you want to hear this roller coaster of a story, if you have ever been in the same boat or you're in the same boat right now, you want a little tea, you want a little comfort, keep on watching. So first, I'm going to bring it back a little bit to the time I was able to move out. If you haven't already watched it, you can watch my video about how God gave me an apartment. I remember filming that video in the apartment that I used to live in, and just feeling so blessed, so grateful that I was able to move out of my parents' house at a time when it was just so dire. I just was going to lose my mind if I lived there for any longer. I was essentially in a sublet situation. I had a roommate. Rent was super affordable. It was a very convenient location. I'm central to everything, close to my parents' house. Everything was really, I would say, perfect about this situation. It was a roommate situation. I do have a daughter. I was growing out of that space anyway, but was I quite ready to move when I had to? Not quite, but God does everything for a reason. And so I remember getting the news that, like, hey, you guys have essentially about 90 days. I think it was around September 2023 when I got the news, and the plan was be out by January. And I was really taken aback. I didn't know what my next move was going to be. I was actually depleting my savings because I was out of work. I was doing some entrepreneurial things and really at a financial place where I couldn't just get up and put a down payment on a house. And so when I heard this news, I was really, really anxious, really taken aback, really just wondering, like, God, why now? This timing couldn't be worse. And I just needed, in my mind, like another year and I was going to get my life together. But God sometimes has to push us and catapult us into a different direction, and it gets our juices flowing. And he does that for a reason so that we're not stagnant. When we're stagnant, we're not critically thinking, we're not being innovative, we're not trusting in him and believing in him for vigor. I will admit, I had gotten comfortable. Even though that situation wasn't the most comfortable, the idea that my rent was cheap and that I had a place to stay at night for me and my child was very, very comfortable for me. So now finding out that I essentially had to be out before the new year completely rocked my world. My next steps, I started to think, and before even invoking and inviting God into this process, I just started to think for myself. And the way I started to think in lack. I started to think in haste. I started to think in just I wasn't thinking clearly, but what came to me was like, hey, maybe if you move out of the state, that might be a good idea because obviously rent everywhere else is going to be much cheaper than it is in New York State, right? Or New York City, should I say. The first place that came to mind was Atlanta. I love Atlanta. I've been there a few times. I have actually built a little small community down there of people that I know. I started making a list of all the people I knew. The list grew into the 20s at some point. And I was like, you know what? Atlanta is the way. I started looking at apartments, luxury apartments, $1,500 a month, $1,800 a month. I was like, I got this. I can do this. In fact, the thing that really had me thinking that I was going to be able to stand on business was that I had a 10K check that was supposed to be coming from one of my real estate deals. And so I was like, you know what? This check is going to come through. It's going to come through just in time. I'm going to be able to, save up like 5 months rent in advance. And I'm going to have another real estate deal coming in between that time before the money even runs out. So I'm going to be fine. But I just can't live in New York because rent in New York is like $2,500 a month for studio, or if not more. And I just, in my mind, knew that that wasn't smart. 10K check falls through, deal doesn't close. I'm back to square one. And I'm like, yo, where am I going to go? My brother was explaining to me that, like, hey, listen, I'm about to move out. Our apartment is going to be free. They live in the edge of Brooklyn. But nonetheless, I'm like, you know what? The rent there is not half as bad because it was another, sublet landlord kind of situation. I was like, you know what? I can afford that rent. I can afford it. I do still have some savings. I am still expecting more real estate deals to come in. It's fine. It's not going to be Atlanta, but at least, I'm going to have my own space. It's a 1-bedroom apartment. Again, the rent is not going to be berserk. And yes, I'm going to be living essentially an hour and a half away from my community, but better than nothing. This is kind of how my mind was whirling and swirling. Whole time, I'm making plans, crunching numbers. I'm waiting and hoping and praying on real estate deals to close. And God is sitting in the corner like, I don't recall you asking me one time if any of these moves are the right moves. I don't remember you asking me one time, inviting me into your decision making process, allowing me to take control of the decision making process, and, surrendering everything else that you're feeling, all of your other emotions to me. I didn't do that. I just started planning. And this is exactly why things went how they went. Atlanta was silly because I was not going to have any childcare down there. I wasn't going to have a car down there. I was hoping that 10K could hold me over for 6, 7, 8 months, which is silly. Everything about that Atlanta plan screamed illogical. It screamed, again, I'm just thinking from a lack standpoint. I just want a nice luxury apartment for cheap. And that wasn't God's plan for my life at that time. BK was the next thing. Moving to Brooklyn, everything was gonna be fine. Brooklyn starts falling through because let's say the timeline for my brother and his family to move out was going to be late December so that I can have this apartment freed up. Late December becomes a problem. Now we're not going to move out by December, but maybe by February for sure. I'm asking the person that's supposed to be moving back in. So this person needed the apartment by January. So I'm asking them like, hey, listen, I know you said January. Can I get till end of January? She said, you know what? That's fine. I'll just make some arrangements. You have a child. I don't want you to be out on the street. That's okay. End of January or mid January rolls around. She's checking in, like, hey, how's it looking? I'm like, not looking too good. Can I get another extension? I'll be out by March for sure, for sure. She said, listen, I understand. I still have a place to stay in the meantime. This is just somewhere that I need as like a supplement. But you know what? I'll just still stay where I'm at for the meantime. All good. You have a daughter. Don't want to kick you out on the street. You're fine. March comes, still no signs of, my brother and his family being able to move out. They were on their own delayed timeline as well. So I don't blame them at all. They were frustrated with their own situation, and essentially the door kept closing. I had to put my tail between my legs and ask for a third extension. And I knew that, no matter how nice someone is or how gracious they're being or whatever, there comes a time where you're like exhausting you're exhausting the grace. Part of me was actually going to move out without really having much of a plan, but then she sends me a text message. She's like, listen, end of March, and that's pretty much all I can do for you. And I was like, you know what, that's more than enough. You've been more than gracious. I thank you. Let me make some arrangements and I'll be out of here by the end of March. So in that month, I'm thinking, because around January, my sister moved out. And if you watched my video about how God gave me an apartment, my parents' house was just full. This is why I had to move out. I had my own room, but my sister was there, my nephews were there, my parents were there. It was a lot. So I found out in January that my sister moved out and there was essentially a free room in my parents' house. And I knew that that was an option, but it was not an option that I liked. I didn't like the idea of moving back in with my parents. I didn't like the idea of, what the optics would look like, what society might think. I already took a step forward in my independence, and now I'm taking a step backward. And I just fought with that idea for so long. But here I am. I have 30 days to get out of this apartment, get my life together. And finally I invite God. Finally I invite God into this process. And I'm like, God, I don't know. The 10K, it never came through. The bank account is literally running dry. There's just a lot. I don't have a lot of options right now. And so finally I told God, I'm done planning. You tell me where to go. And it just became very glaring, very evident, very loud that he wanted me to move back in with my parents. And what I love about God is that the answer he gives us, it's not always glamorous. It's not always what we want to hear. But there's so much sound reasoning behind it. And it's just so wise, the answers. And they're so obvious sometimes. But our pride, our flesh, our ego, the spirits, the fruits that he did not give us, I wouldn't even call them fruits, but the things that he did not give us, those are the things that really muddy and cloud our understanding of what he wants for our life and our understanding of the next place he might be calling us to. I went back and forth about this idea. I was thinking about maybe I'll just stay in a long-term Airbnb, or maybe I'll just couch surf. I was just thinking of people whose couch I could surf on for 30 days. I don't know. I just was thinking anything but going back to my parents' house. And eventually I surrendered. And I just told myself, you know what? The embarrassment, or however I'm perceiving this thing, it's all made up. It's not real. I'm thinking about, what will other people think? What will my adversaries think? What will the people that I need to be flexing on right now think if they were to find out that I moved back in with my parents? And all of that was just a distraction from, hey, listen, sometimes in life you're going to have to downsize and you're going to have to be humbled. You're going to have to go back to your roots in order to propel. I knew that I had, and I know that I have plans and, a blueprint for being financially successful. I've had a lot of bumps and curves along the road, but taking on rent when I didn't have to was just going to be prideful and just illogical thing that I was going to do. And so I knew that once I started thinking more like what is needed right now, what is needed for myself, for my daughter, how can we stay safe? How can we stay fed? How can we stay provided for? How can I not do anything too risky? All roads led back to my parents' house. So in that journey, there was obviously a lot of emotions involved, a lot of them having to deal with, external opinions or external perception and how things would look if I took steps backward. But ultimately, there were three lessons that I learned in this process. The first lesson I learned, God's timeline is not our timeline. We create these timelines of when things should be done, by what age, in what order, in how long, or whatever the case may be. And God is outside of time, He's outside of space. He sees the whole picture from start to finish in ways that we can't. We can only see elements of the picture. What society tells us is that there's like a linear way to go about life. Finish high school, then you go to college, then you get your career, then you start your family, then you become very successful in your 40s, and then the house, and then the picket fence. And that's not God's timeline, and that's just not realistic. If things go perfectly according to plan, how is character going to get built? How is strength going to be tested? How is God going to be a component in your life that you need to lean on for trust and for faith if everything is just linear? And, when things don't work out in that linear cookie cutter fashion, we end up beating ourselves up when that was never the game plan anyway. The truth is, like I said, God is outside of time. A lot of times we try to intervene and speed up the process or change course or do things in our own timing or our own way. For example, me wanting to move to Atlanta, like why? No family out there. The people that I wrote on the list, they were all associates and acquaintances. I was not going to have, much moral support. I was literally banking on one check to like save my entire life and fund this entire move. And it was just silly. I just think about in the Bible how God promised Abraham that he was going to be the father of nations. And Abraham and Sarah were well within, their 70s, 80s, 90s and still didn't have any kids. And so they're like, I know God said this and he promised me that. However, the way things are looking right now, he might have either forgot or he's just, lying. This promise was a false promise. So they intervened, right? They decided to take matters into their own hand and involve Hagar and, allow Abraham to impregnate their servant woman. And how did that story end up? It ended up messy. It ended up with Hagar getting kicked out with a kid, ended up with resentment. And ultimately, God ended up still honoring them and honoring his promise because he can't lie and doing the thing that he said he was going to do anyway, giving them kids, making Abraham the father of many nations, making all of his descendants more than the stars in the sky like he said it would be. I'm sorry, I'm just getting annoyed at how sometimes, we think we know more than God. And I essentially did the same thing. I was trying to run a play that God never told me to run. The second lesson that I learned is there is freedom in acceptance and surrender. If you've ever, heard about what a rip current is, it's the part of the ocean where the tide will take you in and could essentially kill you. You are taught that if you ever get taken in by a rip tide, instead of trying to fight against it or swim against it or do whatever, you actually should lay back, relax, and let it take you. And eventually, what's going to happen is the same tide that took you in is going to take you back out. And in life, there are some riptides that come along the way, and we try to fight them. We try to go against them. Hey, listen, you have to move out in 90 days. Okay, you know what? I'm going to run. Oh, I'm going to go pay rent where I don't even have two nickels to rub together right now. Because guess what? At least then society can't judge me. At least then I still look like an independent boss. I was fighting so hard where God had already had a door, a table prepared for me. He had, means provided for me. And I said, you know what? I don't care anymore. I don't care how this looks. And actually, I'm grateful. There was a release. There was a release of emotions. I just felt so free that, you know what, how nobody could make me feel a type of way. Nobody's judgments could be passed onto me and harm me. I just made peace with the situation, and there's freedom in that. Once I let go of all these false made up narratives, I felt relieved. At the end of the day, if you make peace with something and you are okay with something, the opinions of other people cannot get to you. I know where God is calling me to. Just like He promised Abraham something, He has promised me prosperity. He has promised me financial success. He has promised me a very big life. And the optics of the situation right now feel very small. It doesn't mean that bigger and better is not coming. So because I can stand on that, because I know that God already explained this to me and I know what's coming, I can't be bogged down by the current circumstance because I have to be able to see further than what it is that I'm experiencing right now. You know, people might laugh at my situation right now, but the Bible says God is going to prepare a table before you in the presence of your enemies. And that is one of the biggest fluxes. My situation right now is building character, it's building humility, it's allowing me to never get too comfortable with how things can be, keep my head down and keep working. And essentially, He's going to prepare a table before me and all will be well. The third lesson that this whole process taught me is that gratitude is the only attitude if you truly want to excel. Life will humble you. You can have a victim attitude, a why me attitude, or you can take accountability for the choices you've made. While you're in the middle of your wilderness season, it may not accelerate the process, but it's going to keep you grounded while you're on the journey. Practicing gratitude will bring you back to how God will still provide even in the midst of the wilderness. And I think about in the Old Testament in Exodus when the Israelites were in the wilderness, God provided manna and quail. He literally rained provision, rained bread from the sky so that they could be fed. This is not a season in my life that was on my bingo card at all. But I have a bed to sleep on. Me and my daughter are good. We have shelter. We have provision. We have food. Like things could have really, really, really went left. And the fact that I have a place that I can go back to, there's some people that can't go back to their parents' house even if they wanted to. And the fact that I have that option, even though it's not the more glamorous option, provision in the middle of a wilderness season, only God, only God, only God. And I'm so, so grateful. What's next for me? I'm not sure. Have I started writing a vision and making it plain? Absolutely. Have I started taking steps toward the next goal? 100%. Am I sitting my butt down in this season and letting God take the lead? Absolutely. I know God has called me to a mission, and all I can do is put my head down, do the work, and be patient. You're not going to plant a seed today and expect a harvest tomorrow. Right now, I'm doing the work, I'm being patient. I can be rest assured that He is weaving together a plan that is exceedingly abundantly more than I could even think of in this mind. I thank Him so much for what is to come, and I thank Him for the current season that I'm in right now because all of it is part of the story. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, leave a comment down below. Are you in your wilderness season right now? What are you trusting God for right now? And also be sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. See you guys in the next one.